Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy from down under, Daydream Deluxe. Now, collecting vinyl was a fun but also expensive hobby in the best of times. And there are various reasons as to why we love to collect these flat circular pieces of PVC that inhabit various sound waves and groove patterns. It could be because they feature some of the music from some of our favorite artists and albums. Maybe for the color and patterns that are etched into the physical itself. Perhaps it could be from a particular year that the album was actually pressed. And it could be for the type of material that they contain or were made from. Most of the vinyl that we've been collecting that we know so far has been made out of PVC and even contains some recyclable elements. But that isn't exactly the case for what we're going to be talking about today. So for this video, we're going to shed some light on some really interesting and quirky vinyl variants from some of the most unlikely substances you would never have expected. Over the years, we've seen liquefied, augmented reality, and even holographic vinyl, but they don't really compare to what we're going to be talking about here. Some of these peculiar pressings that we're going to be talking about involve chocolate, ice, blood, hair and urine, an asteroid, and even a small independent record label that dedicate themselves to creating 33s and 45s out of obscure material. But before we get into the video, if this is the first time you've been to this channel, be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons. I do a whole heap of content relating to Vaporwave and all sorts of different types of music. I do some unboxings here and there. I do all sorts of different things. I'm trying to provide more variety for this channel. And be sure to leave a comment below because that also helps us out in the algorithm on YouTube. And honestly, I cannot wait to have you back for another video because the next few that I've got lined up are going to be a real blast. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk vinyl. More particularly, the weirdest kind of vinyl that has been pressed in the most recent times. Back in the year 2012, French house producer Breakbot released his debut By Your Side with the legendary electronic label Edbanger. As part of the production for this album, Breakbot decided to do something rather left of field with building up the hype of this particular release. His idea was to make an edible chocolate variant of By Your Side. It was pressed, or maybe in this case baked, on a 12-inch 74% dark chocolate with 120 copies that were to be sold exclusively at a store in Paris called Colette, and each of them were sold for $21 US. And only one side of the vinyl was actually playable, and the groove patterns that were instilled on the record only contained 3 tracks. The purpose of this record was to listen to it 3 to 5 times at the most until the needle wore out the chocolate, and then you were to eat it. So it's been nearly 9 whole years since this uncanny yet delectable release was actually marketed to the public. But the question that's probably on everyone's mind right now is, has anyone actually refrained from eating it and actually sustained its condition? To be honest, I don't think anyone would have been able to maintain the product in its original state, because as we all know, chocolate usually gets stale after 2 to 4 months before it gets stale. And considering that no one has actually sold this record secondhand on Discogs, I think it's safe to say that we all know what's happened to all 120 units of this pressing. But one thing's for sure, if you just so happen to be one of the 120 people that got their hands on that physical pressing of By Your Side on chocolate by Breakbot, you actually had an excuse to say that those beats were tasty. Next up on this list is An Island Called Earth by Emperor Yes. Now at first glance, you wouldn't think that there was anything weird or abnormal about this pressing. In fact, you would think it was just another tricolor variant. However, there's a little bit of a twist to this one. See, the first 100 copies of An Island Called Earth actually contained the particles of asteroid dust and was said to have been sold for €16.99 each. I can't conclude what meteorite was used in the pressing plant, but all I can tell you was that it crashed onto Earth in the 17th century. It reads as follows on the LP's page on the Bandcamp of Alcopop. People like to say, always sing about what you know. So we sing about science and history. They also say put in your vinyl what you love to most. So we put a piece of outer space that collided with Earth in the 16th century. Science and history. Now, while the meteorite implanted vinyl sold out immediately on Bandcamp with no surprise, the singular colored variant on the other hand is still available on the Bandcamp of Alcopop and is said to be sold for about £12. Even though this variant doesn't contain any particles of an interstellar object, it's probably still worth collecting and having in your collection, knowing that a band did something pretty interesting with their vinyl. So if you have £12 or whatever country you live in, what currency exchange you guys have, I'd say put your money towards it. Now this next one I'm going to be talking about, I was contemplating on doing an entire video about it, but I don't think there needs to be much said because there is already a plethora of videos detailing the entire history and the origin behind it. But let's talk about bone music. Now the term bone music does in fact sound like some kind of Tim Burton-esque musical number where the skeletons are using their rib cages for glockenspiels, but no, that's definitely not the case for this one. Dating back to Stalin-era Soviet Russia, music was heavily prohibited all throughout the country, and the only type of music that was legally accessible for the citizens of Russia was traditional folk music from Russia or Georgia. In spite of this, all of that changed when a various amount of bootleggers from all across the USSR somehow managed to get music from outside of Russia into their country. Various people in the USSR managed to find a way to distribute all of this music in the underground, in the black market, which of course was all deemed illegal, but they somehow managed to get away with it by putting all of this music on X-rays. Despite how poor the quality of the music was and the type of risks that these people were going through just to barter and sell these records, it became really successful in the black market. When it came to obtaining music from, say, Little Richard or the Beatles, their idea of currency exchange involved a small bottle of vodka. So you pretty much just get a 7-inch or maybe even a 12-inch depending on what there was for a bottle of vodka. And because it was the black market, obviously it kind of worked in the same way as drug dealing. Except instead of exchanging money for a substance that gave you some kind of high for a very small amount of time, you were getting something that could possibly be permanent that you could listen to and reuse over and over and over again. And the good thing about this bone music, these substitutes for vinyl variants, was that they were extremely flexible and you could easily slide them under your sleeve and almost no one would suspect a thing. This became the norm in the black market until the mid-1960s when the authorities actually legalized reel-to-reel tapes for people to purchase, which obviously sold a lot faster purely because of the sound quality and people just had more access to more music that they actually enjoyed. And not much is known about the bone music records from several years ago, but what I do know is that Stephen Coates, a musician from a band called I have to look at this. The Real Tuesday World has done a ton of research into the whole topic about bone music and it's actually really interesting. He's done a TED Talk. There's also a mini documentary that he was featured in called X-Ray Audio, which details about the history of bone music, how it was produced and what happened and the aftermath and so on and so forth. I'll leave that in the description below. It's a fantastic mini documentary that is easily available on YouTube. If you want to get more insight about the whole scene of bone music from the 1940s to 60s in Soviet Russia, by all means click that link. I certainly enjoyed it and there's some pretty interesting stuff you'll find about it. Religious folks, beware because this next one is pretty spicy. In 2010, a hardcore punk band known as Hellmouth released their sophomore Gravestone Skylines on paper and plastic with 699 records pressed through that label. Of those 699 units, there were 333 on a mix of orange, red and yellow, another 333 on standard white, and an additional 33 contained Bible ashes. And that's not a joke either. Hellmouth literally grabbed an archaic 19th century Bible, doused it in gasoline and lit it on fire, and then they had the remains taken to the pressing plant and it resulted in something like this. Unfortunately, you'll be shocked to hear that this novelty item here doesn't actually contain any music. Its only purpose is to be a sacrilegious piece of eye candy to add to your collection. So unless you had one of the other two variants on wax, there was no way you were ever going to be able to enjoy listening to this. I mean, sure, it does look pretty cool, but don't you think it kind of defeats the purpose of owning that said record? But at the end of the day, Hellmouth are who they are, and they can do whatever the hell they want with their merchandise. It's not my band, so who the hell am I to tell them what they can and can't do? And if you thought that last one was weird, no. We haven't even scratched the surface. This next one gets extra fucking weird. In 2014, an underground punk band known as Yoapis dropped one of the filthiest and most obscene physical pressings to ever come out of the music industry. Now what you are seeing here isn't actually your standard translucent yellow. What you're seeing is in fact hair and urine. That's the real McCoy. That is legitimately human hair and piss. Now I've got a yellow and brown / stomach bile variant of the album Bad Blood by Clowns, which by the way you should totally listen to. They are one of the fucking awesomest punk bands to come out of Melbourne. But what the hell is this? I have never known a band to actually incorporate their own bodily fluids into the physical media of their products. And I tell you what, this really takes taking the piss to a whole new level. Even more bizarre is that this single-sided 7-inch contains only one track that goes for no more than 1 minute and 44 seconds. Aside from the single, there isn't much else that Yoapis have actually released as a band. The only other material that Yoapis have actually put out includes a 3-track EP called Live Life on Opium and a split EP with a band called Lonely Planet Boy. For something as uncanny as this, I'm really not all that surprised that there are scalpers charging for triple digits because, well, this is in fact a pretty fucking weird piece of history right here. In 2013, the indie pop quintet known as the Shout Out Louds released their 4th full-length, Optica, which also received some pretty good reviews from the press. In addition to this, they did something rather extraordinary and very left of field for the PR stunt. They not only dropped a single called Blue Ice for the fans to get a taste of what was to come for the next album, but they wanted to provide their most loyal fans a really unique listening experience, which involved the listener making the record all by themselves. Now, upon hearing this, you might think that you need to go to an actual record pressing plant in order to achieve this, but that wasn't the case for what they actually had in mind. You see, in order for you to listen to this Shout Out Loud single, you had to make the physical using nothing more than your freezer. You heard that right, the record was actually made out of ice. Allow me to explain. There was an extremely limited edition box set that only 10 people in the world could get their hands on. The box contained nothing but a silicone mold and a small bottle of distilled water with instructions on the box telling you how to make it. You pour half the whole bottle of the water into the mold, then you freeze it for about 6 hours at the least. You gently remove the ice from the mold and voila, it sounds a little something like this. Honestly, I really don't know how to conclude this, except end it with a very unintended pun and say, that idea is actually really cool, and I have a feeling that of the 10, Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat probably has this in his record collection. Now, aside from that god-awful hair and urine concoction from Yoapis, this is probably the grossest out of the lot. In 2012, once again, the Flaming Lips released a collaborative Record Store Day exclusive featuring Nick Cave, Bon Iver, Erykah Badu, and Tame Impala called Heady Fwens. I'm seriously not gonna get used to saying that. Heady Fwens. Heady Fwens. I sound like fucking Elmer Fudd. At the time of Record Store Day 2012, there was said to have been over 10,000 units made for this particular album, and that it contained a very unique color gradient scheme in the LP. However, of that 5-digit quantity, there was an additional variation that contained, get ready, human blood. Now, we're not talking about movie prop corn syrup blood or even the blood red shade. What you're seeing is a legitimate arterial infused variant that contains the blood of most of the collaborators on the record, Heady Fwens. Now, this pressing, like the previous entry, Blue Ice, was limited to 10 people, and the price for this one was actually extremely absurd, but I suppose for good reason, because it does contain the blood of certain people, and considering that they're of somewhat of a celebrity status, I suppose that kind of does add up. But the record was sold for $2,500 US, with only 10 copies sold in the world. It reads as follows via Discogs. This is the blood-filled version of the Heady Fwens release. Waincoin claimed that he had requested and was given blood samples from some of the album's collaborators. His plan was to have small amounts of the blood sandwiched into the vinyl of a limited edition of the album and make them available to interested rich Flaming Lips people. The double LPs with blood inside were pressed at United Record Pressing in Nashville. Artists who gave blood for the project: Chris Martin, Alan Palomo, Erykah Badu, New Fumes, Kesha, Justin Vernon, Alex Everts, Stuart Cole, Jim James, Brian Gibson, Brian Chippendale, Sean Lennon, and Charlotte Kemp Moore. Since it's been 9 years since this extremely rare variant was actually made available to the public, and judging from what I've seen on the most recent Instagram posts, the blood inoculated into the record has seemed to have already coagulated and has darkened over time, which, by the way, is to be expected. Now, I would never have expected any kind of band to do such a thing, let alone a band like the Flaming Lips, but at the end of the day, I suppose it was well worth it for them, because the money that they received did end up going towards a good cause. Now, for this last entry, we're going to put the spotlight on an entire business that dedicate themselves to creating some of the quirkiest kind of vinyl we have ever seen in recent years. Enter Romanus Records from Indianapolis, the label that eschewed the standard procedures and vinyl production by amalgamating numerous substances that you wouldn't find in your ordinary run-of-the-mill vinyl packaging. Now, before I list some of the variants that they fashioned over time, if you ever told someone about this record label and the materials that Romanus have integrated into each of the vinyl pressings, they would not believe you and jump to the conclusion that it's all just a bunch of malarkey. But no, these guys really laid their money on the table for the manufacturing process. Since their establishment in 2015, Romanus have successfully made 33s and 45s out of sand, Doritos, LED lights, beer, glow-in-the-dark razor blades, and gunpowder. And unsurprisingly, over the years, they've seen just about all of their stock being completely sold out. And all these bells and whistles that you'll see in the records aren't just for show either, and that the people at Romanus actually put their noses to the grindstone in making sure that the sound is in its best sonic quality. And you can even see all this for yourself on the channel Too Many Records, who actually made a video showcasing some of the content that Romanus have made over the years. I'll leave a link to the video in the description below, and it will give you some good insight as to how Romanus perfect their craft and making sure that everyone's getting their money's worth. Seeing a business such as Romanus entering uncharted territory when it comes to vinyl production has actually become somewhat inspiring for other independent record labels. I'm lending credence to this because another record label known as Needle Juice Records, who are known to produce a whole heap of vaporwave related records, will be releasing a 2LP of Desert Sandfield's Warm at Night's New World Disciples on a variant that contains 4 different colors of sand, which by the way is currently available for pre-order and will be shipped sometime in November if I remember correctly. Regardless, what Romanus have been doing in recent years is extremely inspiring, and it would be awesome to see other content creators try and push that envelope a little further into making something that seems so bizarre but actually works. And based on what I've been seeing, it's immensely paid off for them big time. And it'll be awesome to see what they have in store next. So that is some of the weirdest but also interesting vinyl variants that have been made in recent times. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a comment sharing what you think is one of the most interesting records you have seen. It could just be a record that you've seen at the store, it could be one that you own. Feel free to let us know in the comments and tell us what you think is the most interesting variant of vinyl that you have ever seen in your life. But until then, I will see you in the next video, guys. Big love from your boy down under, Daydream Deluxe. I'll see you in the next one. Catch you guys.